Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This webinar is sponsored by the Institute for Human Ecology at the Catholic University of America in Washington. The IHE is the nation's leading academic institute committed to increasing scientific understanding of the economic, cultural, and social conditions so vital for human flourishing. My name is Jan Bentz. I serve as a lecturer and tutor at Blackfriars Studium and Hall here in Oxford, and I'm an associate member of the Faculty for Theology and Religion. I'm teaching mostly medieval philosophy and modern philosophy, and very interested in all things Catholic and all things Thomistic. I'm very, very pleased today to host this webinar, and I'm more pleased, it's my esteemed privilege, to be joined by Ambassador Eduard Habsburg, who's tuning in live from Rome today. Welcome, Your Excellency. Welcome, Eduard.
Hello from Rome and from my office.
Now, one brief housekeeping item for all of the people that are tuned in today. If you would like to ask a question, that is possible. So please submit the question at any time throughout the interview via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in the little Zoom bar. We will, time permitting, try to get to many or ideally all of those questions in the Q&A portion in the last bit of this interview. So there's a lot to say about Eduard Habsburg Lothringen, who right now is serving as Hungary's ambassador to the Holy See and the Sovereign Order of Malta. But not just that, he is also an author, obviously a member of the House of Habsburg, and the great-grandson of Blessed Charles of Austria, the last Habsburg emperor. Now, he is happily married.
I would immediately have to stop you. I'm not a direct descendant. I'm a great-grandnephew, twice removed, but not a great-grandson.
Very good. Okay, well, that is my fault then. Thanks for clarifying that. However, what I think is correct, that you're happily married, even though we can get a second opinion from that from your wife, and father of 6 children, now celebrating 3 decades of happy family life. Now, you were educated in philosophy. You also worked as a screenwriter. You worked as an author for, scientific books, but also children's books. And you worked as a media liaison for the Catholic Diocese of St. Pölten in Austria before entering state service. So you did a lot of things in your life. What was your favorite?
Diplomat, funnily enough, because when I was asked whether I wanted to be an ambassador to the Holy See, my first reaction was, never in my life. That must be the most boring job in the world. My image of ambassador was people standing around at cocktails with a champagne glass in their limpid hand, smiling, friendly, and not ever being able to say anything. And I always said, that's not me. I'm someone with strong opinions. And I'm someone who has written, as you said before, I've even worked for television, and I've written screenplays, and I've written at least an outline for a zombie movie. So that's not your typical ambassador. I had a very wrong idea of what a diplomat is and can do. And after 10 years here, I can tell you, it's really the greatest job that I ever had, because in most of the other things I did before, screenwriting or cartoon animation or spokesman for a bishop, I could only live a part of what I am and what interests me. In this job here, I can bring it all together. Writing, communicating, being with media, living the shades of gray of saying something in a way that it can be understood, and bringing people together, and so many other things. No, it's a great job.
Very good. Now, you also kind of accumulated your own little empire on X, and I think that should be mentioned. So you have about 115,000 followers on X. Was getting an X account and being active there part of your job initially, or was that something that you wanted to get into anyways?
That's a very good question. I believe I began on X when I became a spokesman of the Bishop of St. Pölten, and I decided I need to be in the loop of what's being discussed. That was in, I think, 2012, and And in Austria, X consisted 90% of journalists. So it was my way of sitting around in their coffee break and listening into them. And my aim was to get to know all of those who spoke about church, to meet them personally, but also to interact with them and to get to know the way they thought. That's how I got into X. And from the beginning, and if you go back and read my old tweets, you will see it's very consistently, I'm trying to build a very wholesome atmosphere around myself. I'm always nice. When people attack me in a nasty way, I usually answer with humor or so. And very often nowadays, the people around me defend me because I'm a nice guy and I try to encourage people around me to be nice. And I think each one of us can build these little empires within the world of X, where you foster wholesomeness, friendliness, respectful way of teaching. I also like to interact with people who have different opinions from me. When I was still working for the Bishop of St. Pölten, I had a podcast with a German atheist, Alexander Waschkau from Hoaxilla, and it was called Glaubenssache, a matter of faith. And we discussed topics from mine and from his point of view, and it was very respectful and very nice. So yes, that's the thing I try to do on X. Also trolling, I love to troll. I love to sometimes poke into discussions as the Habsburg guy when people discuss about Habsburgs in Spain or whatever. No, I'm having far too much fun on Twitter.
So then the question is, are you thinking of the Roman Empire often?
All the time. All the time. I'm thinking of the Roman Empire all the time. My bookshelf is full of Loeb library books. I've got Roman coins. And of course, the last 10 years, I've been moving through Rome. And already when I lived in Austria and in Bavaria, I was always trying to find the Roman remainders of old roads. The Roman, when you're in the center of Vienna, for instance, a whole block near the Kärntnerstraße, down to the Danube Channel, is basically is the surrounding fence of a Roman camp. All of these things I always like to see. So I already thought of the Roman Empire long before I came to Rome. But here I really got very much into it. It's true. I think most of the men out there are thinking of the Roman Empire all the time.
Your Excellency, Eduard, I have two books here from you. So first of all, I have The Habsburg Way, which came out now a couple of years ago with the subtitle 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. I read it and I find it fascinating, not just because you actually only give 7 rules for turbulent times, you give many more rules if you read between the lines, but I really got to know your family. I really felt like I got to know your family. And was that the same experience from you when you wrote it? Like, did you have to research many of these things? Was this something that was familiar to you? And maybe can you explain a little bit what it means to be a Habsburg?
That's a very good question. And yes, you're absolutely right. It was a real path of discovery for me. I have to explain that when you're born a Habsburg, you have to become a Habsburg. And you become a Habsburg mostly in school when people are beginning to laugh and turn around whenever the name of Habsburg is mentioned in history. And you suddenly realize I should probably get to know my family history a bit, because they will always look at you and imagine that you know everything about that topic, which you don't, of course. So I remember going to my Uncle Otto, my father, reading books, and once meeting Empress Zita, the last Empress of Austria, when I was a boy, and that impressed me deeply. And when you walk through a museum and there is some sort of ruler and he's wearing a golden fleece around the neck, he's almost certainly an ancestor of yours. That's quite moving. And so you begin to think about it, but I honestly begin to think about it very seriously when Sophia Press asked me to write this book. They said, why don't you write a Habsburg history for us. And I said there is about 1,000 to 12,000 books about the Habsburgs. If I want to write something, I want to write something special. So I decided, what do we stand for? What does every Habsburg stand for? What are the topics that we always stood for? And I gave a talk about that topic a few years ago, and I whittled it down to 7, and I made this the basis. So what I did is through asking uncles and reading books, I narrowed it down to 7, and then I went through my entire Habsburg library, which, thanks to my parents and things I bought, is rather ample. And I went to every single book and looked for little shreds of this element through the centuries. So what you will find is 1 or 2 of my principles, and under the principles say through the centuries, who lived this to the fullest? What were typical examples of those? And what then turned out to be in the end a self-help guide, Habsburg self-help guide, as Michael Knowles called it. And but it's a fun, slim little book. You can read it rather fast. And my other aim was, as you said, you got to know my family. I wrote this, and especially the 4 or 5 page intro about the Habsburg history, for the younger members of my family who, like me, were not born with the knowledge, but unlike me, live in a time where you have the attention span of a post on X, and most people don't read books anymore. So I wanted them to at least know a little bit of Habsburg history. So I wrote an introductory history where I gave them 5 dates to memorize. And I said, if you've memorized those 5, you know already a lot of more than most people that live today. And you are supposed to, because you're a Habsburg. So I mostly wrote it for them, but I also, of course, wrote it for my readers. So it's a fun book, it's light, and it has been translated into many languages. And it's really quite fun. It seems to be rather, what impressed me most was when Sophia Press, they are very thorough. They send you on a podcast and YouTube and TV interview journey of several months. I was interviewed by a podcaster from the Deep South, United States. And she told me, when I read your point number 5, that spoke directly to me, or something like that. I don't know whether it was 5. And I said, goodness, this elderly, rather conservative aristocrat from Europe connects to someone in the States who comes from a very different background through a book he has written. So that was very, very impressive for me. And of course, one of the things I discovered, and that was, I think, the greatest discovery, is how many ties there are between the Habsburgs and the United States. Principles and historic ties. There are several states in the United States that I considered Habsburg territory. California, Texas, most definitely. The first governor of Texas was put there by the Spanish Habsburgs. In San Antonio, over the governor's palace, you have a double eagle over the entrance. And but those are principles. I think that there are many similarities between the way America is built from the grassroots up and the idea how the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg Empire were built. And I speak about that in my book. So that was quite an interesting journey of discovery.
And you illustrate it so beautifully. You really write like a journalist, and that is supposed to be a good thing, right? That's not you don't write like a philosopher or like a diplomat. It's to the point, and it is very entertaining. So I enjoyed it thoroughly, and even my wife read it, which is just to mean that she enjoyed it as entertainment more than a history book. Now you said something really interesting there, which is this kind of, you have to become a Habsburg. You're born a Habsburg, but you also have to become a Habsburg. This reminds me really of, this is our Christian call. Like, we are born as human beings, but we also have to become real human beings, right? So it's an interesting way of, because, when, as you said, everybody expects you to have the name to be magically infused like the Matrix with all things Habsburg, but they don't realize that you have to live up to that ideal in the first place.
But also, if you are a Habsburg, you have a ready-made identity that is presented to you. And you can take this mantle and put it on and live it. Or you can say, no, that's not for me. I want to be free. I don't want to be burdened with all those centuries of history and expectations by people. But if you read my book, you will see that one of the points is called "Know Who You Are and Live Accordingly." If you're a Habsburg, you should embrace being a Habsburg, and that goes for everybody, and that goes for your Christian faith. If you come from a Christian family, then you should embrace that. And so yeah, you're right. That's an important topic.
Now, you said that you wrote it partly for the members, the younger members of your family. Now, obviously for your own children, but then for the extended network of Habsburg around the world. That's something else that I find really interesting. And I find myself confronted as a teacher. You don't really see fruits of your labor very often. Sometimes you have a student asking a question or getting involved into a subject that you may have sparked the interest in, but you don't really see the fruit. And I said, well, many of the things that I want to write down, I actually want to write down for my students because I see that they don't understand certain things. So I can enable them to maybe do that. So this leads me neatly to your second book, Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World. And this was the title of today's interview, really. So this is what we want to focus on. And there's a lot in here, very similar to the 7 rules, so to speak. Now, you yourself are a very happy husband and happy father. Can you just say something about that? Because I have the feeling every time that you speak about having a family, your enthusiasm is just very contagious.
Yes, and I sincerely hope that this is an experience that everyone who gets married makes. I, of course, look around me and I see this is not the case. In many countries in the Western world, especially, marriage is not something very beautiful and successful. Many people get divorced, many relationships break apart. Some people don't even get married, and you have all sort of other weird things going on. So I thought I should put all my good experiences. And we live in a strange time, as you said before. When you talked about your students, they just don't know certain things. I sometimes have the impression that you have to teach people so many things, so many things that were obvious, that everybody knew for the last 10,000 years. And suddenly, since the 60s, and of course now in the last few decades, they've all become forgotten, and people don't know the most basic things anymore. It's a bit like after COVID, we had, and we still have, in many bathrooms of the world, these instructions how to wash your hands. And I always joke that when archaeologists in 2,000 years will dig through the rubble of this building and they find these signs, they will say, well, they had a great technology, but obviously they were unable to know how to wash their hands. And I think it's a bit like that. My book is really spelling out the most obvious things in the world that all of our ancestors would have said, yeah, of course. I mean, what else? Of course. But you have to explain everything from zero. And so I took my beautiful experience of marriage, dressed it up with Habsburg experiences through the centuries as an excuse, but it's mostly a guide how to find a spouse, how to know what's the right spouse, how to behave before you find a spouse, how to go into marriage, engagement, marriage, children, and all of that. It's, as I say, everybody used to know these things. Now nobody does. And you write things in paper and say, oh, goodness gracious, that's how this happens. And and you feel very wise. So that's how I wrote this book. And it's really beautiful. I've got some very nice feedback from all over the world. Many people tell me it's a nice book and a good book and a useful book. And one couple wrote to me that they used it in preparation for their marriage. They lived in New Zealand. And so I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And of course, my children are reading it. I wrote it when one of my daughters was going through her courtship, engagement, and marriage phase. I wrote it all that time. So I imbued it with all those elements. But we were in talks all the time, and also with my married daughter and with my wife and my younger children, all are reading this book. So I hope, because I don't believe there's a foolproof plan for a happy marriage. It doesn't exist. But there is a number of parameters. And if you use those, and if you set those, and if you do these things right, you have a fairly good chance, not just for your marriage to be successful, but to be happy and fulfilling for all your life. And from my wife and me, getting better with the years. If I look back now, I'm far more in love with my wife now than I was at the beginning of our marriage. This is something that everybody can have, but you have to do things exactly right. And most people don't even get the chance to do it right because they already begin totally wrong even before they begin their marriage. So yeah, that's a bit what I'm trying to do with this book.
It's ironic that one thing that children teach you is that every generation has to learn everything from zero, from scratch, literally every single word, right? We have the sense, I think, when we look back in history, that, well, the generations go on and the knowledge is kind of passed on, but that's really not how that works. Every single person has to learn everything they learn, everything they will ever know. They have to learn that from scratch, and that's something then that goes very well. Well, the lack of knowing that, I guess, is then also one of the causes of not having a family, which is kind of
Yes.
kind of
That
strange.
reminds me of a quote by Gomez Davila,
Hmm.
who once said, "The first and foremost duty of a historian is to convince his generation that history began with them." It's
Yeah,
very ironic.
that's right. That's exactly right.
So you're
So it-
absolutely right. We have to speak about the simplest things. And if I speak about marriage nowadays, and if you ask me why are so many people unhappy? Why are so many people not able to find a good spouse? Why are so many people in desperate and bad relationships and in bad marriages? I would say you have to begin long before the kids get into the dating game, and you have to teach them the fundamental elements, the bricks you build your house with.
Mhm.
And one of them is you have to be an example as parents to your children so they know that marriage is the most desirable and wonderful thing in the world. And a marriage with children is the greatest thing in the world. But after that, you have to help your children to tell them that they don't have to do things the same way that everybody else does. Because what everybody else does is you go to school, then you hook up with someone in the class, you have an intimate relationship, the boys because boys are stupid, the girls because they want to be cool and they want to be respected by the other girls. Then you break apart, of course, because you're far too young and too stupid for all of this. Then you have the next relationship because you still want to be cool and the boys will take what they get and and so on and so on and so on. And I believe that with every such relationship that you begin and break off and begin and break off again, your chance to get a happy and lifelong marriage gets smaller and smaller. Because as my father once said to us as children, I never forget that line, is if you can't be faithful to your wife before your marriage, why would you be faithful to your wife after your marriage? So my key message is just don't enter into that game. And my key offer is you make a swap. You make a great grand swap. You put all your money on red. You play the great game. And the great game is you don't go into this dating stuff. You don't go into this relationship stuff. You keep yourself for the right person. And in exchange, you will have lifelong happiness and lifelong, you will find your wife attractive even after decades. But the way to begin is like that. If you do it the other way around, there is a chance you might at some point still manage to have a good marriage. But it's very hard. It's very, very hard. So that's the first of my points that I try to bring across. It's really about rethinking education. I believe this is happening more and more and more, at least about Catholic and more traditional families nowadays. My daughters tell me that many, many, many of their friends don't cohabitate, don't live together with someone, and at some point then finally get married. And I hope this is a movement that is going to spread all over the Western world because I think it would be a game changer. Yes.
Very good. Yes, very, very, very beautiful. Now, one of the most countercultural things that you're saying in the book is have lots of children. Now you have 6. That's a lot. For most people, that's maybe twice as much as they have. Here in England, you can generally see couples both over 40 and they have 2 children, right? And then after 2 children, it's supposed, ideally 1 boy, 1 girl, and then then you stop. But I mean, having lots of children is really hard. So, what would you advise for those that struggle?
Well, when people tell me that having 2 children is really tough, I always tell them, have 3 children. Because it's really true. I once wrote that on X, and the amount of families who answered to me and said that's exactly true. Because it's basically the moment when you transform and you suddenly realize, and the children become a gang. When you have 2 children, you can still hold them on 2 arms. You cannot hold 3 children on 3 arms. And they become a gang, and they're far less a nuisance to you in everyday life when you have 3 children. But what I'm trying to say, it's a big decision. It's a big decision to have a large family, but it is guaranteed to be the greatest thing you give to each other, to the children, and to society. It's the greatest gift you can do. Really, it's the greatest gift that the spouses give each other. It's the greatest gift that you can give to a child. I see it now with our 6 children, and it's between you and me, 6 is not a lot of children. In Europe, people get freaked out when I say 6 children. When you go to the States and you meet Catholics there, and they look at you with pity, and they say, well, we have 10, and they're far younger than you, and they're not very wealthy. And that's the central point, is like having a lot of children is hard work in many instances. It will mean that you cannot do certain things in your life. As my friend Michael Pröller was the spokesman of Bishop Schönborn, Cardinal Schönborn, who has 9 children, I believe, or 8, once used to say, if I take all my children, we all go to cinema together, and everybody eats popcorn, that's about the price of a flight somewhere to the Canarian Islands or something. So it's a huge decision. You will lead a different kind of life, but you will lead a happy kind of life. People have no idea of the power that a numerous family has, the friendships between the children, the way the younger ones look up to the bigger ones, the way the bigger ones learn from the younger ones to respect them, to look after them, to not frighten them, to see their needs. All of it, there are dynamics going on in a numerous family that are incredible. And I now see it in our little group, our little WhatsApp group in the family. We're in different countries now. All the time, they react to each other. They have each other's back. Someone has a crisis. All the siblings come in, they support, they pray for each other. It's so wonderful. And it's exactly the one element that people don't have in Western Europe. And in the States, perhaps, it's, as you said, it's a reasonable thing to first work until you nearly die. And then just before 40, try to have those 2 children that you want, and then finish the topic. And they lose out, they miss so much, but so much. And the problem, of course, is now here is that even if you get married and you have a Catholic priest or bishop preparing your marriage, they will say things like, don't have children immediately. Take your time, enjoy each other. It's so good. And then earn some money. And when you can afford to have, they repeat all those stupid talking points. Well, my advice is you get married, you try to have children as soon as possible and have them one after the other. Don't wait with having children until you can afford to have children, because then you'll never have children. It's really, go for it. It's the greatest thing in the world. Don't be afraid of the financial consequences. That will be difficult. If you're not a millionaire, it will always be difficult. It will always be difficult to make ends meet. But that is also part of how you raise your children. Because if you have a numerous family, children learn that they're not entitled to everything, that they can't have the latest iPhone, that you may perhaps have one computer for all of them. All of these things make them free from the temptations of the world, makes you free. And So what I'm saying is, this is really a project that I would wish to every couple. But here again, Jan, and that's important, this is a conversation you should have before you even get engaged with a potential spouse. Because if the other person is not ready for a large family, say if your future wife wants to work for a decade when you get married and doesn't even think of children, then you have to think really hard if that's whom you want to get married to. You know, it's just the reality. The reality is, if the other person has a very different vision of family, then don't tell yourself, I will change her, I will change him. You won't. Most people stay the way they are. The way you meet them, they will stay with slight adjustments. The wonderful thing about marriage is that you really help each other grow, and you grow into each other. And there are slight developments, but you stay more or less the same person after marriage and before marriage. And that's why you have to have these talks before you even get engaged.
Yeah, no, the marriage prep is everything. Kristen, well, when we met, we were both in Rome, and then she had to go back to the States, and we did 1 year long distance relationship, and that was great. That was like the best thing that could happen to us, to be honest, because you don't get distracted. You have to take your time. You have to schedule your meeting, which sounds a little bit old-fashioned, but you really only can talk, also via time difference, and that was the most enriching thing, because we read a book throughout the week, and then we had a date to talk about the book, or we watched a movie right the night before and then talked about that. And yeah, you don't get distracted with all of the beauties of physicality, but it's just a reality. So I always say that was a great grace for us, with all of the difficulties. But I do remember that on Valentine's Day we actually had an 8-hour consecutive Skype call, which that was my that
How
was,
nice. How nice.
and it was not boring. It was not boring. No, we had to get up sometime and get something new to drink, but it was not boring. I'm going to grab one of the questions here from the chat, because this is something that I have kind of in the back of my mind as I'm going to assail you with this. And I mentioned this before, but I feel like the next book that you should write should be on fatherhood. Now, one of the listeners here asked the question, if you have any particular thoughts about fatherhood specifically, and I'm sure that you have a lot of thoughts on fatherhood, what mistakes are most commonly made by fathers today, and maybe are there ways to avoid them?
Well, that's very difficult to say in general, because many people are different. And I would say the main mistake made in fatherhood today is absence. I believe that fathers being absent is one of the key elements of why young people are totally lost today. I mean, obviously, fathers running away and relationships breaking up, the worst case scenario, that's horror. But fathers being absent, and I just realized, I've got 5 daughters, and every minute I spent with them is like an investment into the future. There is a beautiful, I never read education books. I hate them. There was one I had as a young father. It's called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And it's a book where a psychologist talks about her talks with women, about her childhood, their childhood, and their relationship to their father. And what they say is the father shapes your idea of God, your idea of your body, your idea of your worth, your idea whether you're beautiful. All of that comes from the father. So if your father is there and sees you, and your father is there, is proud of you, and your father is there and has strong opinions about you, they tell one beautiful story. That really was a strong one for me, because you think that if you're a father of a daughter, you always have to let them do and give them freedom and all that. And she said there's a story of this woman who sat there, and she talked about the moment that she went out for the first time, and the boy who took her to the restaurant where everybody was said he's going to bring her back at 11 o'clock. So he promised it to the father. And the father said, okay. So they took her to the restaurant, and 11 o'clock she wasn't back. Father got into the car, drove through the restaurant, walked into the restaurant in front of all the cool people, and took his daughter home. Now you would say, what a cringy nightmare. What a horror. How embarrassing. But the psychiatrist said she told me this story with so much pride in her voice, because she said what she felt was he obviously cared for me, and he looked out for me, and he protected me, even if I was embarrassed at the moment. But my father was there for me, and he really cared about me. So what I'm trying to say with all of this, be there for your children. And then also perhaps ask your wife advice. Because I remember one of my daughters, very different from me, and about 1 or 2 years into her life, my wife said, you two don't really know each other. And he said, I want you for New Year's Eve to make a decision. You are going to court and woo your daughter for the next half year. You're going to try to win her. She's your special project now. And that was so incredible, because it was like breaking through walls in a wonderful way. We are the greatest friends today, although we are very different. And that was because my spouse, my wife, saw that I was needed here in a special way. She didn't say the same thing to me about my son. She said, no, that's going fine. And so, children are very different. If you have 6, you realize how incredibly different. You get a child, a baby, and then you're shocked because it's such a great experience. And the second baby comes, and he says, "No problem, I know how to handle baby." And the second child is totally different from the first. And then the third one comes, and it's totally different from both. And you realize how incredibly different human beings are. And that's why it's so good that you're two, because one of the two spouses usually has a good eye for what this child needs, that child needs. But it's really every minute invested is like a sponge that is dry that you put water onto. It gives this child the elasticity and the strength to get into life later on. It's the most wonderful thing in the world, really, to be a father.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, I recall Jordan Peterson mentioning that a child is, every single of your children is a possibility to have the best relationship with that person in their life, basically, right? And
Yes.
that kind of puts it into perspective. And that is something that in very difficult moments, I recall, and it's just, that's a very good advice. And sometimes we fail, and sometimes the children really also fail in their own way. But
We fail all the time. I feel
yeah.
so humble as a parent, because you see how many little mistakes you make, how often you say, if I would have been a bit more attentive, I could have noticed that. Oh, I've heard that person all the time. So it's wonderful. Keeps you from believing that you're just the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah. Now you just mentioned your daughter. So and this is one of the other question that came in, who says, as a Catholic woman who has never dated before or has never seriously dated, what would your advice be to put myself out there and find a good future spouse? Now, again, as you said, this will be particular to every individual person, but maybe can you say a couple of words for that? How did you meet your wife?
Oh, yes. Okay. Um, I got engaged to her while we sat under a crucifix in a pilgrimage place. I think that tells you quite a lot. I believe I didn't speak about the first point, the most important and the central point, even more important than the family point in a spouse. You have to find someone who shares your faith. Not only shares your faith, not only has a baptism certificate in the Catholic Church, but someone who really, really has God in the center of her or his life. So what you should do is you should look for a husband in the surroundings of good devout places and churches, of pilgrimages and places of worship, and not in your local bar, because there is a chance that you will find the perfect spouse in your local bar around the corner. But it's far more probable that you find it around the church, around circles of people who are of faith and devout. If you find someone who is devout, who lives his faith, a man who tries to be upright, good, like a knight, someone who's chaste, and someone who will fight for you, then you will probably find this person around people of faith. That's just a very easy way of going into it. Now, some people decide to get married to someone who hasn't got the faith or is on a path. That can work, but your money back guarantee is if you marry someone who has faith. Now, many people tell me this is difficult. These kind of men don't exist. Men don't make commitments. But then I tell you again, the most probable kind of man that would want to make commitments is around the Catholic centers and faith. And the number of young men that are looking for a good Catholic wife and spouse, even in early age, is growing exponentially. I blame the traditional Latin Mass and many conservative parishes where people suddenly discover that this is something incredibly desirable, that you want to build your life and your marriage on someone who is of faith, and that it is far better than the kind of dating world that other people have. The number is growing. It's, I would say, a very fresh phenomenon. It exists since a few years, but it's going to go really large. So for many of those who still haven't found, go to other places, go to places where people go to pray, and have a bit of patience, because they will be there. I gave a talk in Dallas where I spoke about Blessed Emperor Karl at a big, huge conference about Blessed Karl. By the way, begin a novena to Blessed Karl. He was the perfect husband. He was good looking. He was chaste at the same time. He had 9 children. He loved his wife very much. His wife was beautiful. It was a great marriage, even if it was only short because he died early. Make a novena to Blessed Emperor Karl. He's very good, I think, in getting you a good spouse. And at that conference, for instance, 700 people, was a big conference, many families. And a family gave a sort of buffet lunch on the next day. And they said a dating lunch. Whoever is interested in relationship, family, marriage, etc., come. And then there was food, and then there was me and other people talking about marriage, and all the people who were interested in the topic came, and there were more boys than girls there. So I'm just saying, there is hope, and you just pray and you ask God to find the right person. They do exist more than 10 years ago, and definitely more than 30 years ago.
You mentioned that your children and so siblings have their own kind of relationships that you can't even fathom, and that's what really very few people talk about. That when you have multiple children, they do develop a relationship with each other, and that can be very helpful. And it's in fact that is also one of the fabric elements of society now, and of your family, and then of society. Now, but I have another question. So every stage of a child has certain problems, obviously. Very small children have different problems, and mother is usually more apt in resolving those. And then the older they get, they have different challenges, and they usually come all at the same time, as you already have said. What about letting go? You're a grandfather now, so you have seen the youngest children becoming older, having families of their own. How do you? So let me ask this: how do you properly step back as a parent?
Well, thank God your children, especially if you have daughters, and as most of my children are daughters, I've got one son too, they still want advice all the time. So you don't really let go. But I remember one of my daughters, when she got married, I wouldn't say I was jealous of her future husband, but there was an element of saying, that's the girl that I'm protecting. and you realize, no, now is the moment to step back, and you hand her over to someone else. And I am very it wasn't difficult so far. It wasn't difficult. Always went all very naturally. But you know, two of my younger daughters always tell me, "Oh, we will never find a good husband because you set the bar so high." That is, of course, what every father wants to hear. I'm pretty certain they will. They will find one. But it's very nice to hear that. Yes.
Towards now, we are coming kind of to the close, but I do want to address the elephant in the room, which is the best dressed man, which is unfortunately not you, and certainly not me, but the man behind you on the picture. Who's that?
Oh, that very good-looking young gentleman is my great-great-great-grandfather, Emperor Franz Joseph. That's him about 18 years old in 1848 when he became emperor. And he's quite an example in many, many ways. Perhaps not the perfect family father, but it was mid of the 19th century wasn't a good time for that among monarchs. But a very exemplary Catholic, and dashing too. So he is, I would say, among most people living nowadays, probably the best known Habsburg. Within the family, it would be Blessed Emperor Karl, but in the normal world out there, Franz Joseph and of course his wife Sissi Elizabeth are the most well-known Habsburgs out there.
Now, he famously said that his job was to protect the people from the politicians. Hearing him say that, it feels like we need another Franz Joseph in our day.
Oh, that's such a great anecdote. So President Roosevelt, the Nobel Prize winner Roosevelt, went to Europe to tour European countries and teach people democracy and talk about America. And then he visited Franz Joseph, I think it was in 1911. They had been writing to each other before that, so they knew each other from writing. And then they had this conversation, and in the middle of the conversation, Roosevelt, to provoke Franz Joseph, said, "Well, Your Majesty, now that we have parliaments and parties and prime ministers and chancellors, what exactly is your job?" And Franz Joseph was supposed to have said, "My job is to protect my citizens from their politicians." And I think that's a very wise thing to say, because if you look at perhaps not in the States, but in Europe, there is no element above party politics. There is, in theory, the president, but a president often also comes from that system. So there is nobody outside and above that people can look up to and can say, nobody that doesn't think in 4-year terms, that doesn't think, if I say this, will I be re-elected in a year? We don't have that element anymore in modern democracy. And yes, sometimes I ask myself whether some things wouldn't be better if we had that element again.
Now, are you planning on writing another book, joking aside? Like, do you have that in the plan? You said that your stint as an ambassador may come in its kind of final moments. What does the future look like for you? And will you share some of that with us?
I will be more in Central Europe. I will also travel more to the States. I will have soft diplomacy work after that. We'll speak a lot about family history and such things. And indeed, I have written a new book. It's very small. It's a tiny brochure. It's a little travel guide to the traditional Latin Mass for curious people, explaining what it is. Very small. It's going to be something that you probably don't even have to pay for, and it's going to fit into your back pocket. And I'm going to explain why it smells differently, why it looks weird, and why it's still worthwhile getting to know it. And this is going to come out in the next few months with Sophia Press. It's also going to come out in German, probably in Italian, and other languages are on the horizon. So that's a fun little booklet. And then in the future, I will continue to write from time to time. But first of all, I think I'm going to take a nice breathing pause and just settle down a bit, because the last 10 years around the Holy See were a wild ride as ambassador.
I bet. So I'm going to pick a couple of the questions just to close off, if that's all right. So one of them, and you can keep the answers short here, Eduard. So one says, could Ambassador Habsburg please talk about his daily routine when he had children or when he had young children? Can you say something about that?
A daily routine sometimes goes a bit out of the window when you have young children. As somebody on X said 2 days ago, posted a dialogue between mother and daughter, mother kissing 3-year-old child and saying, "Good night, my sweet little child. We'll meet again tomorrow morning." And the child answers, "Oh, we'll definitely meet before tomorrow morning." So that is the reality. If you have small children, planning goes a bit out of the window. I think keeping regular prayer hours is very important. And one of my routines is that I get up before the family. I'm an early riser. I make myself a really good cup of coffee, and then I do my morning matins in Latin. And that is like a fixed point in my day. I believe every one of us should have one place in the day where he knows or she knows will find time for prayer. This little spot exists in everybody's life, even if it's on the bus or in the train, but there is one spot in the day where God wants to plant his flag. And for me, it's a combination of a cup of coffee and Latin matins. That helped me through many, many, many tough times with small children.
And you obviously read Latin because it's much easier than Hungarian.
I read Latin because it's the language of the church, and I'm in the lucky situation to have read Latin 9 years in school and 3 more years in study. So it came natural to me.
Very good. Now, as I leave you the last word, what was your favorite anecdote about your own family that you discovered while researching for your books?
Well, I'll leave you with a hopeful note. It's a story I discovered when I wrote the new one. Because we spoke about the importance of being a good father. And I know there are many people out there who wouldn't consider themselves good fathers and don't have much hope and say, this is unreachable. I can't be like that. And in my second book, I tell the story of an exemplary father in the Habsburg family who used to be the only Freemason we ever had. Franz Stephan von Lothringen, husband of Maria Theresia, he was not a great shining light when it came to Catholic faith. He did his stuff, but he never spoke about faith. He never wrote about faith. He had a vague humanistic approach to everything. Very nice, but not very outspoken on faith. But there was one point that he was adamant, and it was confession. And he used to pester the children with this. He said, there is a devil and an angel sitting on your shoulder. They're fighting for your soul. You go to communion a lot, but you always go to confession. And he repeated that over and over and over to them. And he went to confession every week on Sunday before he went to Mass. So, and Maria Theresia wrote one later to their children, you remember your father always said that? Do you remember how he died? Because Franz Stephan went to the theater, he felt ill, he went home and he died at home without a chance to going to confession or to getting the sacraments. But Maria Theresa said God had granted him to die on a Sunday, so he had been to confession and Mass just before he died. And that is the greatest gift that you can have. And he says, this is the gift of God because your father was such an example as a father just by telling you to go to confession. And I believe for children, it's a great image to see their father standing in a queue for a confessional. And Franz Stephan von Lothringen, the most unlikely hero in this sector, is for me a great story. How you can be a good father even if you're not a perfect person.
Very good. Well, thank you for that, Your Excellency. Thank you, Eduard. Thank you for your time specifically in this evening. And we're all excited for any new book that you have. I recommend everyone again to look into Building a Wholesome Family in a Broken World or The Habsburg Way, 7 Rules for Turbulent Times. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope to see you next time. All the best.
Yes, thank you very much. And I hope that I will come to Washington, D.C. and visit the university soon.
Goodbye.